Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS and welcome to our live YouTube classes. This is the second session of our international relations based current affairs revision course for prelims. Yesterday, we had covered around 15 major topics along with a number of subtopics. But if you remember, we were still left with a couple of questions, so let us start with that. But before we begin, please like, comment on our videos and please do share them with fellow aspirants. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So let's get started with the second session of our IR based current affairs session. Let's look at the first question. Which of the following are correctly matched? On the left, we have a set of ethnic groups that are often mentioned in newspapers. We have the Uighurs, the Kurds, and the Pashtuns. And on the other side, you are expected to check whether these ethnic groups have been correctly matched with the region that they are predominantly found in. The Uighurs have been matched with the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Kurds have been matched with the Xinjiang province of China and Central Asia. And Pashtuns have been matched with the Iran-Iraq border. But all the three have been incorrectly matched, so option D is the right answer. All the three are incorrectly matched. To understand this, let us talk about these groups, these ethnic groups, in greater detail. First, let us talk about the Uighurs. See, the Uighurs are an ethnic Muslim minority community found in China. They are predominantly found in the Xinjiang province of China, which is China's northwestern province. It is present around Central Asia. It is quite close to Ladakh of India as well, right? The Uighur Muslim minority found in Xinjiang, they have always felt discriminated and they have always felt oppressed by the Chinese government. They feel that the Chinese security forces have targeted them. In China, the majority community, that is the Han, the Hans are the majority community in China. The Uighur Muslims who are in minority, they feel that the majority Hans have discriminated against them. They have targeted them. So this feeling of discrimination and oppression has given rise to a rebellion of sorts in the Xinjiang province. This is basically an internal divide of China. This is one of the regions where China deals with an internal unrest. Some of the radical elements amongst the Uighurs, they have even established a terror outfit known as the ETIM or the East Turkestan Islamic Movement in order to carry out attacks against the Chinese government and the Chinese security forces. The objective of ETIM is to liberate Xinjiang from China and establish an independent country that they call as Turkestan or East Turkestan. This is supposed to include parts of the Xinjiang province and as well as few areas around Central Asia as well. See, radicalization is quite rampant in the region, mainly because of the proximity of this region to the Af-Pak belt. I'm sure everybody knows that the Afghanistan-Pakistan border is a hub for radicalism and extremism. So the radicalism present here, it easily spills over into Central Asia as well. And you do have a number of extremist fundamentalist outfits that are operating in the Central Asian region. So the Uighurs, who feel oppressed and discriminated against by the Chinese government, even they have got radicalized by the influence of these groups. They do have connections with some of the terror groups that operate in Central Asia and in the Af-Pak region. And they frequently carry out attacks in China, that is in Xinjiang. So this is one of China's biggest internal security concerns. That's one reason why the Uighur community is constantly in news. Then, to counter the threat of radicalism, to tackle extremism in Xinjiang, China has come up with a very controversial policy. It has set up these so-called re-education camps. According to reports from Western intelligence agencies and from Western media, China has reportedly set up a number of re-education camps where the Uighurs are being forcefully pushed in the name of de-radicalization. China's objective is to carry out de-radicalization through these re-education camps. But in the name of de-radicalization, China has been accused of violating the human rights of the Uighur community in the Xinjiang province. The accusation is that in these re-education camps, Uyghurs are being forced by the Chinese authorities and by the Chinese security agencies to go against their faith, their belief and their practices. They are forced to consume alcohol. They are forced to eat pork. All of these activities are prohibited in Islam. They are treated as haram. And Chinese government has been forcing these acts upon the Uyghur community. This is what is being reported by the Western governments and the Western media. So they have been targeting China and they have blamed China for violating human rights of the Uighur community in Xinjiang. So this is another reason why the community is constantly in news. Okay, now let us talk about the other community which was mentioned in the question, that is the Kurds. The Kurds are native to this region of Middle East. They are found in the border areas of Turkey, Syria, Iraq and Iran. Please take a look at this map. It is in this region that the Kurd ethnic group can be found. The Kurds have been fighting an insurgent war against the government of Turkey for a number of decades. The Kurds have set up a number of militant insurgent organizations and they are seeking to liberate the region, the Kurd inhabited areas, and they want to establish an independent country known as Kurdistan. That is their primary objective. Just like the Uyghurs and the ETIM wants to establish East Turkestan as an independent nation, the Kurds in the Turkey-Syria-Iran belt, they want to establish an independent nation for Muslims, for the Kurd community known as Kurdistan. So the Kurd community can be found not just in the border areas of Turkey, but they can also be found in parts of Syria along the Iran-Iraq border as well. Recently, the Kurd community has been in news for a number of reasons. The main reason why the Kurds were in news is because the Kurds have played a key role in the defeat of the Islamic State. I'm sure everyone knows that the ISIS or the Islamic State took birth in the Iraq-Syria belt. This is where the ISIS was born. This is where the Islamic Caliphate had been established by ISIS. So both Russia and the United States, along with help from the European countries, they were fighting against the Islamic State. The war went on for quite a few years. Recently, the Islamic State has been defeated. At least ISIS has lost territorial control in Iraq and Syria. And in this war of the United States against ISIS, the Kurd groups, the Kurd militant groups, they played a critical role. It has been reported that the Kurd insurgent groups, they have supported the CIA of the United States and the American and the Western forces in defeating the Islamic State, and thereby the territorial control of ISIS in Iraq and Syria has been brought to an end. But unfortunately, after making use of the Kurd groups, the Americans have abandoned the Kurd organizations. Right now, Turkish government has been targeting these militant organizations because the primary demand of the Kurds is to liberate areas of Turkey and establish this country known as Kurdistan. So this could directly affect the integrity and the sovereignty of Turkey. So the Americans, after they made use of the services of the Kurd groups, after the ISIS was defeated, they have reportedly abandoned these groups because they have not got any assurances from Turkey that Turkey will not carry out attacks against the Kurd outfits. So over the last 1 year, the Turkish armed forces have carried out many attacks, aerial attacks, and as well as land-based attacks against the Kurd organizations. And that's one reason why the Kurd ethnic group has been frequently in news. The other ethnic group mentioned is the Pashtuns. The Pashtuns are predominantly found in Afghanistan and Pakistan. They are found in the border areas of Afghanistan and Pakistan. They are also found in other countries as well, including in India, but predominantly the Pashtun population is concentrated in the Af-Pak border areas. See, the Pashtuns, they largely comprise your radical organizations such as the Taliban. Outfits like the Taliban, they are largely made up of members of Pashtun community. Okay, that's the reason why the Pashtun community or the ethnic group is frequently in news. Because over the last 1 year, the Americans have worked out a peace deal with the Taliban, right? US and Taliban, they were carrying out negotiations in a third country, that is in Qatar. The special representative of the United States, Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad, he carried out a set of negotiations with Taliban groups at Doha, which is the capital of Qatar, and they have worked out a peace deal which can possibly resolve the civil war, which would allow the Americans to withdraw their troops. So as a result of these negotiations and this ongoing peace process in Afghanistan, the Pashtun community is also frequently in news. That's the reason why this question has been asked. This is a frequent pattern that is followed by UPSC as well. UPSC tends to pick out such important ethnic groups that are in news, and you are expected to know the regions where they can be found predominantly. Okay, so that's the reason why this question has been picked out. Let's move on to the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? India is one of the founding members of the Indian Ocean Rim Association, or IORA. It is focused entirely upon building naval cooperation in the region. The concept of blue economy has recently emerged as a focus area for the grouping. Amongst these statements, the second statement is incorrect. So the right answer would be option C, 1 and 3 only. Let us see why the second statement is incorrect. So let us talk a little more about IORA, or the Indian Ocean Rim Association. See, first and foremost, let's identify the member countries. Let us identify the primary mandate, the primary purpose of this regional grouping. See, the Indian Ocean Rim Association is a very important regional grouping that represents the IOR region, or the Indian Ocean region. It has been set up with India's initiative. India was one of the first countries which took the lead to establish this organization. Today, the IORA has become a very important platform for India to push forward its IOR strategy, which is also labeled as the Sagar Doctrine. Prime Minister Modi unveiled India's Sagar Doctrine in 2015. Sagar stands for security and growth for all in the region. Let me repeat, Sagar stands for security and growth for all in the region. Through this doctrine, India is trying to enhance its influence across the IOR region, and it is trying to establish itself as the net security provider for the IOR countries. So with this objective in mind, India is cultivating very close relations with small island countries in the IOR region, such as Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, Madagascar, etc. We already have close ties with Sri Lanka, right? Plus, India is also reaching out to countries in East Africa, countries in the Gulf, and as well as countries in Southeast Asia. So to take forward this strategy, India is focusing on a regional grouping as well, known as IORA, or the Indian Ocean Rim Association. This grouping includes 22 member states, and all these countries are the littoral states of the Indian Ocean. They are present along the rim of the Indian Ocean. That's why the grouping has been named as the Indian Ocean Rim Association. Please take a look at the member countries. It includes Australia, Bangladesh, Comoros, India, Indonesia, Iran. You have Southeast Asian countries like Singapore, small island countries in the Indian Ocean such as Seychelles, Mauritius. You also have Thailand, United Arab Emirates, and Yemen from the Gulf. So as you can see, this grouping has a very diversified membership, starting right from West Asia to South Asia to Southeast Asia and even to Australia. Across this entire belt, there are 22 countries which are a part of this grouping, which have signed on to the IORA. This is what makes IORA a very important regional organization, and India has been using this as a platform to project its influence in the IOR region. Is that clear? India's Sagar Doctrine is being followed in practice by India's initiatives at the IORA. This grouping also has 10 dialogue partners. 10 countries have been given the status of dialogue partners. This includes China, Egypt, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, South Korea, Turkey, United Kingdom, and the United States. These are the 10 dialogue partners of IORA. So kindly remember them, and please note that the dialogue partners are not essentially from the Indian Ocean region. Countries which are not a part of the IOR region have also been given the dialogue partner status, right? United States and European countries, even countries like Egypt, right? And even South Korea, Japan, and China, they have been given the status of dialogue partners. So this is another key point that you should remember. So now let us talk about how this organization was established. What are its primary objectives? This will help you figure out why the second statement was incorrect. See, the second statement said that IORA's primary objective, or the only objective of IORA, is to focus on naval cooperation. That is not entirely correct, because IORA is not just focused on naval ties. Of course, maritime security is one of the important objectives of IORA, but it also focuses on a number of other areas. So first, let's talk about the background. See, this organization was proposed back in 1995. The initiative was taken up by India, South Africa, and Mauritius. These three countries came together to set up the IORARC. It stood for Indian Ocean Region Association for Regional Cooperation. IORARC. This regional organization was later transformed into the IORA. It later evolved to include new member countries. The name also underwent a transformation, and today it is known as the IORA. So like I said, there are 22 member states and 10 dialogue partners, and the Secretariat of IORA is headquartered in Mauritius. But if you look at the mandate of IORA, of course it gives high priority for maritime security. Under this domain, the IORA members, they focus on the important security issues of the IOR region. This includes piracy, especially in the Gulf of Aden region, that is the Horn of Africa. They also focus on terrorism, radicalism, smuggling, organized crime, etc. So IORA does deal with all maritime security related aspects. It is a top priority for the organization. But please remember, this is not the only objective. It is also focused on other areas such as improvement of trade and economic relations, fisheries management, disaster risk reduction, because the Indian Ocean is very vulnerable to natural disasters. Indian Ocean countries are frequently hit by cyclones, tsunamis, earthquakes, etc. So to help out these small countries in the Indian Ocean, the larger powers such as India, Australia, and South Africa, they are trying to provide HADR assistance, that is humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. So India is one of the lead countries that provides HADR assistance to members of IORA. This is also a key objective of the grouping. Then apart from this, the grouping is also focused upon promoting scientific exploration of the Indian Ocean region. It promotes academic studies. There is focus on tourism and cultural exchanges as well. Because for most countries in the IOR region, tourism is the biggest generator of revenue. Take for example, Maldives or Mauritius, right? For them, the biggest revenue comes from tourism. And for all the member states, tourism can earn precious foreign exchange. So these countries are focused on promoting tourism and cultural exchanges as well. Then apart from all these domains, IORA has started focusing on an emerging domain known as blue economy. See, this is a new concept in economic development. Okay? Blue economy, or also known as ocean economy. Both these terms are used interchangeably. They basically refer to the same concept. So understanding what is blue economy can also be very important for your prelims. See, blue economy is an economic model that is being followed in coastal countries. That is, countries which have a coastline are of late adopting this economic model. It was recommended by the UNDP, the World Bank, and other international organizations. Under the blue economic model of development, sustainable exploitation of marine resources is encouraged. Okay, there are two main pillars of the blue economy model. Please write this down. The first pillar is the sustainable exploitation of marine resources. The second pillar is to channel the benefits that arise out of the sustainable exploitation towards the development of the coastal communities. Let me repeat this. There are two key pillars to the blue economy model. The first pillar is the sustainable exploitation of marine resources. The second pillar is to channel the benefits that arise out of sustainable exploitation towards the socio-economic development of the coastal communities, especially the fishing communities. So this blue economy model is currently being followed by a number of coastal economies, coastal countries. So IORA is also giving a lot of priority to this emerging concept of blue economy, or also known as ocean economy. So this completes our discussion on IORA as well. So now let's move on to the next question, the 18th question. India and Brazil are members of which of the following groups? BRICS, G20, G4, IBSA. The correct answer is option D. India and Brazil can be found in all the four groupings. India and Brazil are members of all the four organizations. So let us look at the India-Brazil relationship in brief detail. Let us understand why the India-Brazil relationship is important for both prelims and mains. See, this topic is very important for your exams because for this year's Republic Day parade, India had invited Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro as the chief guest. See, the chief guest that India invites for its Republic Day celebrations is always very significant because the invite that India gives out is based on India's foreign policy priorities. Now, let's say India has invited the leader of United States or the leader of, let's say, Indonesia or let's say Sri Lanka. It means that for the coming 1 year, India would be giving utmost priority in its foreign policy to that particular country. So that's the reason why the chief guest who is invited to take part in India's Republic Day celebrations acquires significance, and it basically means that for the coming 1 year, India would be prioritizing its ties with Brazil because this year, Brazilian president was invited to be the chief guest at the Republic Day parade. So this also points out the growing significance of Latin America in India's foreign policy. See, India is also trying to diversify its foreign relations. India is looking out for new markets. It is trying to acquire more resources. It is trying to make more investments as well, right? So for this purpose, we are focused upon Africa and as well as Latin America, which is relatively unexplored in India's foreign policy. So the invitation given out to Brazilian president shows that India is trying to give greater priority to the Latin America region, and India is trying to prioritize its ties with Brazil in particular. So in this context, let's quickly talk about some of the defining aspects of the India-Brazil relationship, and let's also talk about the kind of cooperation that India-Brazil have at these four organizations. See, India-Brazil, they have established a number of regional groupings that includes BRICS, IBSA, the G4 and the G20. First, let us talk about the G4. The G4 is an informal grouping of Brazil, India, Germany and Japan. This grouping, known as the G4, is focused on promoting reforms at the United Nations. These four countries, that is Brazil, India, Germany and Japan, they want to expand the permanent membership of the UN Security Council. They are at the forefront of pushing United Nations to carry out structural reforms. Their objective is to democratize the United Nations, which is an international institution. This is the primary objective of the G4. So India, Brazil are working together through the G4 to push for reforms of the United Nations. Then of course they are members of the G20 as well, because both are emerging economies. They are contributing significantly to the global economy and the global financial system. So at the G20, India, Brazil are trying to tackle global economic challenges. Then we also have a trilateral grouping known as IBSA. This is a grouping between India, Brazil and South Africa. Until recently, the IBSA was quite prominent. It acquired a lot of significance in foreign policy. But of late, IBSA has lost its significance. But when it was active, IBSA was playing a key role with regard to the Climate Change Convention. Because India, Brazil and South Africa, they had pretty much similar positions with regard to climate change. So IPSA countries were coordinating their approach at the Climate Change Convention. But today, the approach of India and Brazil has started to differ with regard to climate change. And as a result, the relevance of IPSA has been lost. But BRICS is a very relevant organization. India, Brazil are a part of it. Even Russia, China and South Africa are a part of BRICS. These countries have established the BRICS with the objective of reforming the global financial system. They are basically challenging the dominance of the World Bank and the IMF. Why? Because World Bank and IMF are dominated by the Western countries. The United States dominates the World Bank and the European countries dominate the IMF. So emerging economies like India, China, Brazil, Russia, South Africa, they have issues with the manner in which World Bank and IMF are functioning. India has labeled all the three organizations, that is United Nations, World Bank and IMF, as outdated organizations. These organizations are still stuck in the Second World War era mindset. They haven't reformed themselves and they do not reflect current geopolitical realities. They haven't given sufficient representation for countries which are emerging, such as India, China and Brazil. So for this reason, BRICS grouping has been set up by these 5 countries. India, Brazil work together over here. Their main objective is to challenge Western domination in the global financial system. They want to create an alternative to the World Bank and the IMF. For this purpose, BRICS has established the New Development Bank or the NDB as a rival or an alternative to the World Bank. BRICS has also set up the Contingent Reserve Arrangement or the CRA as an alternative to the IMF. Just like World Bank provides funding for developmental projects, the NDB is also supposed to do the same. And just like IMF provides a bailout to countries that are facing an economic crisis, right? Similarly, the Contingent Reserve Arrangement or CRA of BRICS is supposed to do the same task. So BRICS countries are trying to create an alternative financial system. They are trying to move away from Western dominance. And this is another domain where India, Brazil are working together. Then apart from this, there is also a lot of concurrence in the foreign policy approach of India and Brazil. If you look at India's foreign policy doctrine, one of the key pillars, the foundational pillars or the foundational principles of India's foreign policy is the principle of strategic autonomy. Right? Since the days of Prime Minister Nehru, Indian foreign policy has been guided by the principle of strategic autonomy or the principle of strategic independence. It basically means that we are independent in our foreign policy approach. We don't see ourselves as an ally of any superpower. We don't fall under any of the alliance systems. That's the reason why India championed the non-aligned movement during the Cold War era. Now the principle of non-alignment might have lost its relevance, but even today, India strictly follows the principle of strategic autonomy, meaning we retain our independence, our autonomy in our foreign policy making. We simultaneously develop good relations with countries like US and Russia. We simultaneously develop good ties with rivals such as Saudi Arabia and Iran and Israel, right? So India doesn't get misguided by any of the power blocks. We don't fall under any of these alliance systems, and we try to keep our foreign policy independent. The same approach can be seen in the foreign policy doctrine of Brazil as well. Brazil believes in reciprocal multilateralism. It believes that a multilateral system should provide for a reciprocal and equitable relationship. Brazil's belief is that a developed country should treat even a small underdeveloped country with the same respect. Basically, Brazil is looking for a two-sided relationship. It wants to have a mutually beneficial relationship that is a reciprocal relationship of give and take. Brazil is opposed to unilateral demands of the developed countries against weaker countries such as developing and underdeveloped countries. In fact, India's principle of strategic autonomy aligns with this principle of reciprocal multilateralism of Brazil, right? So this can be a possible prelims question. It will definitely help you in writing your mains answers as well. Then let's talk about India-Brazil cooperation with regard to a term known as South-South cooperation. See, in the field of international relations, the terms North and South, they don't refer to directions. the term global north refers to the developed world. The term global south refers to the developing, underdeveloped world. Okay? So countries like India, they have always projected themselves as the leaders of the global south. India being a developing country, it has tried to provide a voice and a representation to the other countries of the global south. So when developing and underdeveloped countries work together and when they collaborate together, it is generally referred to as South-South cooperation. That is, two or more countries of the global south are working together. If you need an example for this, G77 is a classic example for South-South cooperation. What is the G77? The G77 is an informal grouping. India is one of the lead countries at the G77. It includes a number of developing and underdeveloped countries, and it has played a prominent role at the Climate Change Convention. Is that clear? The G77 tries to protect the interests, especially the economic interests of the developing countries and the underdeveloped countries. Especially at the Climate Change Convention, India took the lead role along with countries like Brazil, and we provided a voice to the smaller countries which cannot represent themselves effectively at the global level. Small countries like Fiji, Maldives, they were represented by India. India gave them a voice and their demands were brought up at the Climate Change Convention. So this is an example of India-Brazil working together in the domain of South-South cooperation. That is cooperation amongst developing and underdeveloped countries. So as you can see, the India-Brazil relationship is quite deep. There is a strategic relationship that we have. In fact, we have even stepped up defense ties as well. Earlier, I mentioned the IPSA grouping. Under IPSA, a naval exercise used to be organized known as IPSAMR. IPSAMR was a naval exercise of the IPSA countries. Apart from this, there is cooperation between India and Brazil with regard to development of defense technology as well. So agreements have been signed in this regard. Plus, Brazil happens to be an important trading partner for India in Latin America. Brazil helps us to reach out to other Latin American countries. But please note that of late, India, Brazil, they have started to diverge with regard to climate change negotiations. There is a major gap that has emerged over the last few years between India and Brazil when it comes to their approach towards climate change negotiations. Why? Because the Brazilian government, especially under Jair Bolsonaro, it doesn't believe in climate change. It has rejected scientific studies that point towards climate change. Just like the Trump administration in the United States, the Jair Bolsonaro administration in Brazil and the previous government as well, they had rejected climate change and they were taking a stand pro-industry. They were trying to support unsustainable economic and industrial development even at significant cost to environment, even at the cost of accelerating climate change. Whereas India takes a completely different approach, irrespective of the government in power, whether it is a government led by the Congress or by the BJP, irrespective of their ideological differences, India's approach towards climate change has remained quite consistent, right? India has shown firm belief in scientific evidence. India has accepted the reports of the IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We have our own scientific research as well, which provides sufficient evidence to indicate that our economic activities are directly contributing to climate change. So India is one of the lead countries that is trying to work towards climate action. We are trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. One example is Prime Minister Modi's initiative of establishing the International Solar Alliance. So while India is trying to take a stand towards climate action, when India is trying to work actively towards mitigating climate change, Brazil is taking a very different approach. So this is an area of divergence, but apart from this, India-Brazil have a very strong relationship. It is a strengthening relationship. And since the Brazilian president was invited for the Republic Day celebrations, the India-Brazil relationship acquires a lot of significance. And all these joint initiatives of India-Brazil can become very important for your prelims examination. So let's move on to the next question. India is pursuing the Bilateral Trade and Investment Agreement or BTIA with which grouping? See, BTIA is also referred to as Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement. They both mean the same. India is pursuing this agreement with the European Union. Option C is the correct answer. The BTIA, Bilateral Trade and Investment Agreement, or also known as Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement. It is basically a free trade agreement that India is trying to work out with the European Union. That's why option C is the correct answer. So let us quickly talk about the BTIA. See, the objective of any free trade agreement is to reduce barriers to trade. The objective of any FTA is to reduce barriers to trade. And when it comes to barriers to trade, there are essentially two types of barriers. One is tariff-based barriers and the other is non-tariff barriers. Tariff-based barriers are nothing but your taxes, your custom duties, import duties, anti-dumping duties, countervailing duties, etc. All the taxes that a country imposes against imports is basically a tariff-based barrier. And non-tariff barriers, it could be lack of connectivity, poor immigration policies, very rigid visa policies, right? The lack of border infrastructure, the lack of trading infrastructure. So such barriers to trade are referred to as non-tariff barriers. So the objective of any free trade agreement is to reduce both the type of barriers, to bring down tariff-based barriers and as well as non-tariff barriers. So India has already established free trade agreements with a number of countries and a number of groupings like the ASEAN. We already have free trade agreements with Japan and South Korea. So we are pursuing a similar free trade agreement with the European Union. And this is very significant for India because European Union happens to be India's largest trading partner. Even if you take Brexit into account, even if you exclude Britain out of the European Union happens to be the largest trading partner for India. So this is a very crucial trading economic relationship. So to address all the issues and to further step up the trading volume between India and the EU countries, India and the European Union countries, they have been pursuing the BTIA in order to establish a free trade area so that all these barriers to trade can be brought down. But unfortunately, these negotiations have been stuck for the last 13 years. The BTIA negotiations began way back in 2007. The negotiations were initially progressing. It went on until 2013. But due to a number of issues between the Indian government and the European Union, the agreement has, for the time being, come to a halt. The negotiations have come to a halt. Attempts have been made in 2017 and more recently in 2020 to revive the talks and the negotiations. That's why the topic is so important. Until 2013, the talks were progressing. Both the sides were discussing their mutual issues. But after 2013, talks had come to a halt. In 2017, again an attempt was made to revive the negotiations. It had again failed. And just a few months ago in 2020, a new attempt is being made by India and the European Union to revive negotiations regarding the BTIA. That's why this topic is so important for prelims. So let us quickly understand what issues emerged during these negotiations and what has prevented India and the European Union from establishing this free trade agreement. Okay, let's take a quick look at this. See, the major concerns are related to intellectual property rights, investment protection, then trade in agriculture and food items. These are some of the contentious issues that have emerged during negotiations. See, European countries are developed countries. So they expect a very high standard when it comes to enforcement of intellectual property laws. They want a very strict enforcement of IP laws, and the Western standards are way above the standards of a developing country. Now, a developing country like India can't afford to enforce Western standards when it comes to IP laws. Why? Because the cost will be borne by the domestic industry and by the Indian consumer. If a strict enforcement of IP laws is carried out as per Western standards, the Western products, the patented products of the West, will find a massive market here. Problem is that Western products are usually expensive. Take, for example, drugs. Patented drugs of Western companies, Western pharmaceuticals, are very, very expensive. Whereas India is able to bypass this challenge by promoting the production of generic drugs. right? So a developing country like India can't adhere to the strict interpretation of IP laws which is implemented as per Western standards. So this is one of the contentious issues. European countries are developed countries. They want India to enforce Western standards when it comes to IP laws. India is hesitant. That's one reason why the negotiations haven't progressed. Another reason is the lack of investment protection in India. Again, the developed European countries, they want a number of measures to protect their investments. See, from 2000, India has received nearly 90 billion euros as investments from European Union countries. This is massive investments that has flown into India. In the last 2 decades, we have received nearly 90 billion euros as investments from Europe. So European governments, they want their investments to be protected. How? Through better enforcement of contracts, through better resolution of disputes. So for this, they want Western kind of laws to be implemented in the Indian context. But again, a developing country like India has a different priority. We have different outlook towards socio-economic development. We have a commitment to eradicate poverty. We have a commitment to help out our domestic industry, right? So India can't afford to implement Western standards in this regard. This is again another contentious issue. European companies and European governments are not willing to go ahead with the free trade agreement without these guarantees on investment protection. The other issue is with regard to trade in agricultural products and processed food items. This applies even for drugs as well. The problem for the European countries is that they expect very high hygiene and sanitary standards. For drugs coming from India, for food items and agricultural products coming from India, the developed European countries, they set a very high standard of hygiene and sanitary measures. And again, for a developing country like India, it is quite difficult to match up to these European standards. So these are the main issues that have prevented the finalization of the BTIA agreement. Is that clear? India considers them as technical barriers to trade. India has been trying to seek concessions in this regard, but European countries are not willing to provide these concessions. That's the reason why the BTIA has not progressed much after it came to a halt in 2013. However, attempts are being made to renew the negotiations, so we need to wait and watch as to how things will progress in the future. Okay? Then apart from this, India, European Union also have visa related issues as well, because see, Indian professionals, Indian students, they travel in large numbers to European countries to study and work. So the movement of people to Europe from India gets affected when European countries have very rigid visa and immigration policies. I'm sure most of you would be aware of the strict visa immigration requirements of countries like France, Germany and other European countries, right? So this is another issue that India wants to be addressed. And the other issue is the status of data secure nation. Please write this down. India is seeking the status of data secure nation from the European Union. What do you mean by this? See, European countries, they have a very strict approach towards data privacy and data security. They have data protection laws in place and gives utmost priority to the privacy and data security of the individual. Whereas in India, we still do not have a data protection law in place. Yes, a data protection bill has been tabled in the parliament, but it is still pending. It has not been passed. It is being studied by a parliamentary committee. Since India does not have strong data protection rules and norms, data privacy can be threatened. For this reason, European countries are hesitant to give India this status. Without this status, European countries do not provide market access to IT companies. If IT companies from a particular country have to execute projects and if they have to sign deals with European countries, that country should be given the data secure nation status, meaning that country has strong data protection laws in place. Since India has not been given the tag, Indian IT companies are finding it very difficult to gain market access in Europe. The concern of the European governments is that since India does not have a data protection law in place, the data and the data privacy of European citizens can be compromised. If Indian IT companies are handling sensitive data of European citizens, then there is a risk of that data being compromised. So for this reason, European countries are hesitant. The data secure nation status or tag has not been given to India, and India has been requesting this, and this will be done only after India implements a strong data protection law. Okay, so these are the various issues that are preventing India and the European Union from progressing towards the establishment of a free trade agreement. So please be aware of all these issues. This can come up as a prelims question. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following locations face the Mediterranean Sea? Okay, there are 4 locations given in this question. We have the Gaza Strip, Haifa, Golan Heights, and West Bank. Please take your time, take a look at these 4 locations. I hope you have heard of them. If you're reading newspapers thoroughly, I am sure you would have come across these locations. The question is asking you to identify which out of these 4 locations face the Mediterranean Sea. The correct answer is the Gaza Strip and Haifa. So the right option would be option B, 1 and 2 only. Gaza Strip and Haifa, they open towards the Mediterranean Sea, whereas Golan Heights and West Bank, they do not open towards the Mediterranean Sea. So let us look at the map, understand where they are located, where these locations can be found, and understand why these locations are in news. Again, this is a very important topic in IR for your prelims and as well as for your mains. See, Haifa is a coastal city in Israel. Haifa is a very important port city as well. It opens towards the Mediterranean Sea. And Haifa has a strong Indian connection. That's why I've picked up this location for this question. Over the last 2 years, the city of Haifa, the port city of Haifa, is constantly in news because of a strong Indian connection. We shall talk about that. Then, this is where the Gaza Strip is located. This is the West Bank region. So, West Bank and Gaza Strip combined together, they constitute the Palestinian territories. Right next to West Bank, you can see the Dead Sea over here. Right, this is Jordan. Then, this is where Golan Heights is located. Okay, Golan Heights. So let us talk about all these locations and understand why they are frequently in news. First, let us start with Haifa. Like I said, Haifa is a port city. It's a very important port for Israel. It opens towards the Mediterranean Sea. But what is this Indian connection that we are talking about? See, during the First World War, the Ottoman Empire had occupied this region, including the port city of Haifa. During the First World War, Indian soldiers had played a critical role in the liberation of Haifa. In the Battle of Haifa, Indian soldiers played a key role. Indian soldiers from the princely states of Mysore, Hyderabad and Jodhpur, they played a critical role in fighting the Germans and the Ottoman Empire on behalf of the Allied powers as a part of the British Imperial Army. The Indian soldiers fought on behalf of the British Army and they helped liberate the Israeli city of Haifa from the Ottoman Empire. So as a tribute to the contribution of the Indian soldiers in the Battle of Haifa, India and Israel still commemorate this event. There are a number of memorials that have been set up. In Delhi, you might have heard of the Teen Murti Chowk and the Teen Murti Marg. Right? These memorials, they are set up to pay tribute to the Indian soldiers who sacrificed their lives in the Battle of Haifa. Battle of Haifa is said to be a turning point in the First World War. It is said to be one of the bravest battles ever fought during the World War. Right? Unfortunately, the contribution of the Indian soldiers is not so well documented. We haven't read much about it in our history textbooks. But of late, there's a lot of research that is coming up and there's a lot of limelight as well on this contribution of Indian soldiers during the World Wars. So, as a tribute to the contribution of Indian soldiers, there are a number of memorials in Haifa as well. The Israeli people are quite thankful to the contribution of the Indian soldiers. In fact, when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, when he visited India in 2018, the Teen Murti Chowk and the Marg, they were renamed after the city of Haifa. Similarly, when Prime Minister Modi visited Israel, I guess in 2017, he paid a visit to these memorials and there was a lot of gratitude that the people of Israel shared towards the Indian people, especially towards the sacrifice of the Indian soldiers from the princely state of Mysore, Hyderabad and Jodhpur. So this is a strong Indian connection. It's a cultural connection, right? That's why Haifa is frequently in news. Now, let us talk about the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and the Golan Heights. To understand this, you need to briefly understand the Israel-Palestine conflict. We'll have a small discussion on this because you can expect map-based questions on important locations present in and around Israel. Because see, over the last 1 year, there have been 3 important developments related to the Israel-Palestine conflict. Okay, that's the reason why this topic is so important. 1, Donald Trump proposed a controversial peace plan for resolving the Israel-Palestine conflict. This happened last year. Then Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, he proposed a controversial West Bank annexation plan as a part of his electoral campaign. Then recently, just a few weeks ago, Israel and United Arab Emirates have established diplomatic relations. This is a landmark event in the geopolitics of the Middle East. Why? Because UAE is the first Gulf country to have established ties with Israel. It is the 3rd Arab country to have established diplomatic ties with Israel. So these 3 events make the Israel-Palestine conflict very important for your exams. You can definitely expect both prelims and even mains questions from this topic. So let us have a small discussion on this. See, back in 1947, when the Israel-Palestine question came up, the United Nations had proposed a partition plan. In 1947, the UN had proposed a partition plan. As per this partition plan, a 3-way division of this disputed region had to be carried out. Okay, this is what is referred to as the 2-state solution. The UN partition plan had recommended that 2 independent states known as Israel and Palestine will be set up. Israel would be a dedicated country for Jews and Palestine would be exclusive to the Palestinian Muslims. And Jerusalem would be administered through the UN. That's why the UN partition plan recommended a 3-way division and it recommended the implementation of a 2-state solution. That is 2 independent countries for the Jews and the Palestinian Muslims, and Jerusalem, which is crucial for all the Abrahamic religions, right, which is sacred and significant for all the Abrahamic religions, was supposed to be governed through the UN system. So this 3-way division was supposed to be implemented. It was widely supported by a number of countries. Even India at that point was supportive of the UN partition plan. But in 1948, Israel violated the terms of the UN and it unilaterally declared independence. It declared independence on its own in violation of the UN plan, in violation of international arguments. So when Israel declared independence, the Arab countries, especially Egypt, Jordan, as it was known as Transjordan back then Syria, Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region, they declared war against Israel. So in 1948, a major conflict took place between Israel and the Arab states. And during this conflict, Israel was able to consolidate its position. See, if you look at the first map, these areas were supposed to be the state of Palestine and the rest was supposed to be the state of Israel. But if you move on to the next map, you will find a significant difference. The areas of Gaza Strip and West Bank are significantly reduced because Israel managed to occupy these areas. It basically occupied Palestinian areas. It defeated most of the Arab states in the conflict and it consolidated its position and it increased the territorial extent of Israel. Then a few years later in 1967, another conflict took place between Israel and the Arab countries. It's popularly referred to as the 6-Day War. In this conflict as well, Israel occupied not just Palestinian areas, it also occupied areas belonging to neighboring Arab countries such as Egypt, Jordan and Syria. What did Israel do? It occupied the Sinai Peninsula over here, the Sinai Desert of Egypt. It occupied some of the West Bank regions, which was previously controlled by Jordan. And more importantly, it occupied the Golan Heights, which belonged to Syria. So in the 1967 war, Israel occupied the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, the Golan Heights of Syria, and parts of territory belonging to Jordan. Later in 1981, Israel would go on to annex Golan Heights. Even today, Golan Heights is under Israeli occupation. So these are the disputed areas in the region. Today, the Palestinian areas are restricted to Gaza Strip that faces the Mediterranean Sea and the West Bank region. Okay? If you compare the maps of 1947 and 2017 or 2020, you will find a significant difference. The Palestinian areas are severely contained and restricted because Israel has consolidated its position, expanded Israeli territory at the cost of Palestinian territory. Later, through peace negotiations, the Sinai Peninsula was returned back to Egypt. Today, Israel is not in control of it. Sinai Peninsula has been returned back to Egypt. But Israel still controls Golan Heights, which essentially belong to Syria. It still controls areas of West Bank, which actually was claimed at one point by Jordan. So this is at the root of the Israel-Palestine conflict. These locations, these areas which are constantly in news, they are at the very root of this conflict. See, at the Gaza Strip, you have a radical outfit known as the Hamas, which operates. It operates out of Gaza Strip, okay? And it targets Israel. The objective of Hamas is to liberate Palestine from Israel through the use of violence, through the use of violent acts of terrorism. However, this is a very controversial subject as well. A number of countries refer to Hamas as a liberation organization. They refer to it as a freedom fighting organization. Whereas Western countries label the Hamas as a terrorist outfit, right? Countries like US, European countries and Israel, they label Hamas as a terrorist organization. And in West Bank, you have the Palestinian Authority, which administers the Palestinian areas. So this is the current state in Israel. But the problem is that Israel is still violating some of its commitments by promoting illegal Jewish settlements in West Bank. Over the years, Israel has tried to swing the balance in its favor by promoting illegal Jewish settlements inside West Bank, which is essentially Palestinian territory. Okay? Recently, Benjamin Netanyahu proposed a very controversial plan. His proposal was that Israel would occupy the Jordan Valley. You can see that over here, the shaded area is the Jordan Valley, the valley located next to River Jordan. This is the Jordan River, this is the Dead Sea. Next to it, you have the Jordan Valley. Israel considers the Jordan Valley to be of great strategic significance. It feels that having control over the Jordan Valley is critical for its national security. So with this objective in mind, Netanyahu proposed a very controversial plan as a part of his electoral campaign. He said if elected to power, we will annex West Bank, especially the Jordan Valley region, and as well as the illegal Jewish settlements that have come up across West Bank. This would have basically reduced the Palestinian areas even further inside West Bank. So this proposal was again controversial. Then prior to this, Donald Trump had made a controversial peace plan to resolve the Israel-Palestine issue. He had proposed that Palestine would be granted limited autonomy. According to Donald Trump's peace plan, the Palestinian areas would not be given complete independence, but they would be given limited autonomy and a self-governing mechanism would be created. But Trump's condition was that Hamas had to surrender, it had to be neutralized, because according to the US, Hamas is a terrorist outfit. Then the future Palestinian government had to commit not to establish any armed forces. Since Palestine would not be a full-fledged independent country, the US expected the Palestinian Authority to not establish an armed force in the future. Basically, it would be giving up its right to self-defense and it would weaken the Palestinian region as compared to the dominance of Israel when it comes to the strength of the armed forces. So such a controversial proposal was made, and in return, the US promised that some sort of autonomy would be granted to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank region. And he even proposed to make massive investments to build connectivity between Gaza Strip and West Bank. Because as you can see, Gaza Strip and West Bank are completely divided. So he had proposed to bring investments from the West to promote economic development and to connect West Bank with Gaza Strip. But these proposals would be implemented only if Palestine and these Palestinian organizations, only if they fulfill the conditions set by the United States and Israel. Right? These conditions were not acceptable. They obviously rejected the peace plan. But however, it was a controversial proposal. And recently, just a few weeks ago, Israel has given up its annexation plan. Benjamin Netanyahu has committed to give up the West Bank annexation plan, and in return, the United Arab Emirates has agreed to establish diplomatic ties with Israel. Just yesterday, I'm sure you would have read that Donald Trump has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. It is because of this reason. Because Trump played a key role in convincing UAE to recognize Israel and establish diplomatic ties with Israel. This is a very significant development because UAE is the first Gulf country and the third Arab country to recognize Israel as a legitimate sovereign entity. So, in return for UAE's recognition and establishment of diplomatic ties, Netanyahu has promised to give up the West Bank annexation plan, which had triggered a major controversy. So, Donald Trump has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for this contribution. The claim is that Trump played a key role in negotiating between Israel and UAE. So, that's the reason why this topic is so important. You should be familiar with all these locations, the geographical features of the region, such as the Dead Sea, the Jordan River, the Mediterranean Sea, the Golan Heights, right? So all these locations should be familiar to you so that you will be able to answer any map-based questions. Now let's move on to the next topic. Which country filed a case against Myanmar at the International Court of Justice for violating the human rights of the Rohingya community or the Rohingya minority? The correct answer is option A, Republic of the Gambia. Recently, Myanmar had to fight a case at the International Court of Justice. This case was brought up by Republic of the Gambia. It is a small West African country. It's a Muslim majority country. It is also a member of an organization known as the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So on behalf of OIC, Republic of the Gambia had filed a case against Myanmar at the International Court of Justice, and it accused the Myanmar government and the Myanmar army of committing a genocide against the Rohingya minority. So let us talk about this issue in slight detail. See, we are looking at the map of Myanmar and Bangladesh. Here you can see the Rakhine state of Myanmar. It is a coastal state. It opens towards the Bay of Bengal. Okay? It is in the Rakhine state that you can find the Rohingyas. Who are the Rohingyas? The Rohingyas are a ethnic Muslim minority community in Myanmar. I hope you're aware that Myanmar is a Buddhist majority country. So in a Buddhist majority country, there is a Muslim minority group known as the Rohingyas. They are native, they are found in the Rakhine state. But over the years, the Rohingyas have been discriminated against, they have been oppressed by the government and the army of Myanmar. Why? Because see, historically the Rohingyas, they do not belong to the Rakhine state. They are not exactly native to Myanmar, that is today's Myanmar. If you look back a few centuries ago, the Rohingyas were predominantly a trading merchant community, and they were found in the Chittagong Cox's Bazar area, which belongs to today's Bangladesh. Is that clear? A few centuries ago, the Rohingyas, they were found in the Chittagong Cox's Bazar area of Bangladesh. But over the years, during the colonial rule, and when there were some Muslim kingdoms in the region, the Rohingyas migrated from Chittagong and Cox's Bazar and they settled in the Rakhine state. So after gaining independence, the Rohingyas essentially became a part of the Rakhine state of Myanmar. Right now, they were no longer a part of the Bangladesh region or East Pakistan as it was called then. So what happened was, after becoming independent, Myanmar or Burma, it quickly turned into a dictatorial government. There was no democracy in place. The military of Myanmar had taken over. It's also called as the military junta. The military junta had established a dictatorial regime, and under the dictatorship, the Myanmar army and the government, they were favoring radical Buddhist elements who were opposed to the Rohingyas. So this is both an ethnic and a religious conflict. there is a communal angle as well. Radical Buddhist elements, they wanted the government and the army to target the Rohingya minority. Why? Mainly for political reasons, right? So over the years, the Rohingyas were rendered stateless by the controversial citizenship laws and policies of the Myanmar government. The military junta came out with such laws and policies which declared Rohingyas as stateless. Basically, they were not recognized as the citizens of Myanmar. And Myanmar government placed the responsibility of the Rohingyas on Bangladesh. By citing historical accounts, Myanmar said that Rohingyas belong to Chittagong Cox's Bazar area, so Bangladesh should take up their responsibility and not Myanmar. So through the last 5 to 6 decades, this discrimination and oppression has slowly turned into targeted violence as well. Of late, especially in the last 8 to 10 years, there has been repeated cases of violence. There have been repeated incidents of targeted violence against the Rohingya community. Starting right from 2012, going all the way up to 2018-19, there have been a number of instances where radical Buddhist elements have targeted the Rohingya minority with communal violence. In some cases, the Myanmar army has supported them, the Myanmar government has turned a blind eye, and the army has also carried out a lot of human rights violations, right? In fact, the United Nations has labeled the Rohingyas as the world's most persecuted community. As a result of this targeted violence, lakhs of Rohingyas, they have fled the Rakhine state and they have sought refuge in neighboring countries such as Thailand, Malaysia, Bangladesh, and as well as in India. According to India's MHA, there are around 40,000 Rohingyas who are currently residing in India. But Bangladesh is dealing with a massive refugee problem because the Rohingya crisis has turned into a massive humanitarian crisis in the region. So this is the background to the Rohingya conflict, right? So of late, the Myanmar government has turned a blind eye. The army has carried out atrocities against them. Radical Buddhists have perpetuated targeted communal violence as well. So these violent incidents has directly compromised the human rights of the Rohingya community. So for this reason, the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, right? It had blamed Myanmar of committing a genocide. And on behalf of OIC, Republic of the Gambia has filed a case at the ICJ. Recently, Myanmar had to argue its case in front of the ICJ and it was accused of committing a genocide. It was accused of violating the terms of the 1948 Genocide Convention. But before we talk about this, let me explain how the Rohingyas are being rehabilitated as well. See, Rohingyas have been received as refugees by a number of countries. Like I said, they have taken the risky sea route and they have tried to travel to Thailand and Malaysia. Of late, they have shut their doors as well. Earlier, India was quite receptive to Rohingya refugees, but right now the government has taken a stand against them, mainly because there is a Rohingya terror organization known as the ARSA. The victims of Rohingya violence, right, those who are affected by communal violence in the Rakhine state, they have been radicalized and they have set up a terror outfit to fight against these atrocities known as the ARSA. It stands for the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. Arakan refers to the Arakan Mountains that runs in Myanmar through the Rakhine state. Okay, the ARSA is a terror outfit. Reportedly, it has ties with Pakistan's Lashkar, Pakistan's ISI, and as well as the Al-Qaeda. So this is a security concern for India. So India has taken a stand against accepting Rohingya refugees, especially when the recent crisis came up, because India considers the Rohingya community as a security threat. But this stand of India was criticized by the UN and the international organizations, and even India's Supreme Court and the NHRC. They criticized the Indian government for labeling the entire community as a security threat. See, the Supreme Court and the NHRC recognized that ARSA is indeed a security threat because ARSA has all the motivations to carry out attacks in India as well. Because India is the birthplace of Buddhism, India has always built close relations with the Myanmar government. We have never criticized the army and the government in Myanmar publicly, right? Plus, India has a number of important Buddhist pilgrimage centers as well. So, India would be an ideal target for an outfit like ARSA. Yes, India would have all the right to label the ARSA as a security threat. But labeling the entire community as a security threat is a very controversial decision, and that's for that reason India was criticized by the UN and other international organizations, and as well as by the Supreme Court and the NHRC. However, Bangladesh has been forced to take in a number of refugees. Currently, lakhs of them are being accommodated in refugee camps that have been set up at Chittagong and Cox's Bazar. Okay? Then you need to remember one important location, that is the Bhashan Char Island that you can see in this map. The Bhashan Char Island is constantly in news. It's a small island that belongs to Bangladesh. It is located at the opening of the Meghna river system. Okay, it's a very small island. It's a low-lying island. Here, Bangladesh has built a refugee camp for the Rohingyas. And Rohingyas have been forcefully taken over there, and they're not allowed to leave the island at any cost. So this has triggered a controversy at the global level. Why? Because the Bhashan Char Island is a low-lying island. It is highly vulnerable to rising sea levels because Bangladesh, it is directly threatened by climate change and rising sea levels. And this is also a region where massive cyclones are witnessed. The Bay of Bengal gives rise to very severe cyclones, and it is believed that cyclones of high intensity can threaten the well-being of the Rohingya refugees who are being forcefully rehabilitated at the Bhashan Char Island located in the Bay of Bengal. It's a very low-lying island. That's the reason why the Rohingyas are at risk. But Bangladesh is not willing to rehabilitate them. It's not willing to take them out. And that's one reason why the Bhashan Char Island and these refugee camps have become slightly controversial. Okay? Now coming back to the case that Gambia had filed against Myanmar. See, Gambia took up this case on behalf of OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Right? So during this case, Gambia accused Myanmar for violating the terms of the 1949 Genocide Convention. It blamed Myanmar for carrying out atrocities against the Rohingya minorities, including innocent civilians, and these charges were brought up. So at this case, the ICJ passed a ruling. Recently, the International Court of Justice passed a ruling. It held the Myanmar government responsible for ensuring and protecting the human rights of the Rohingyas. The ICJ criticized the approach of the Myanmar government and the army, and it said the Myanmar government has a legal responsibility to protect the Rohingyas, to ensure that their well-being is taken care of. So in this regard, ICJ has mandated Myanmar to furnish periodic reports on the action that it is taking to prevent these atrocities from taking place. Okay? Myanmar is currently under obligation to send these reports to the ICJ, and ICJ has directed Myanmar to take all measures possible to prevent these atrocities from occurring again. So this is a clear-cut direction that has been issued to the Myanmar government. So that's one reason why this topic was in news. Now let's quickly talk about the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and as well as the Genocide Convention. Let's take up two practice questions on this topic as well. Which of the following statements are correct? The OIC was founded in 1969 to act as the collective voice of the Muslim world. It consists of 57 member states. India has been recently included as a member of the OIC. Amongst the given statements, the third statement is incorrect, so option B is the correct answer. 1 and 2 only. So let's understand why the third statement is incorrect by talking about the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. See, OIC is frequently in news mainly because this international grouping, this international platform has been misused by Pakistan to run its propaganda against India. You might have heard about Pakistan trying to internationalize the Kashmir conflict. It has tried to bring up India's decisions related to the Citizenship Amendment Act, Article 370, and the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir at the global level, and it has tried to accuse the Indian government of violating the rights of Indian Muslims and violating the rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. So this has been a long-term strategy of Pakistan, and it has been trying constantly to internationalize the Kashmir conflict at the UN and as well as at the OIC. The OIC is a right platform for Pakistan because Pakistan is quite influential at this grouping. So what is the OIC? It is basically a grouping of majority Muslim countries and countries with a predominant Muslim population. Okay, and this grouping has been set up mainly to protect the interest, the collective interest of the Muslim world. Interestingly, India, despite having one of the world's largest Muslim populations, has not been accepted as a member of the OIC. Even though India has one of the world's largest Muslim population, we still haven't been accepted as a member of the OIC. Why? Mainly because of Pakistan's role. Pakistan has used its influence, especially with countries such as Turkey and Malaysia, to target Indian interests. Pakistan has blocked India's entry into the OIC. It has prevented India from defending itself against these allegations. It has repeatedly used the platform to accuse India and bring up allegations against India of violating human rights and violating the rights of the Kashmiri people. It has criticized the Citizenship Amendment Act, Article 370, etc. So in this regard, Pakistan has been able to generate some support against India. Few years ago, even the Middle Eastern countries were against India. Some of them, like Saudi Arabia and UAE, they used to take the side of Pakistan because they always had a closer strategic relationship. But this dynamic is currently undergoing a major change. Right now, Saudi Arabia and UAE, they have developed close ties with India. In fact, this can be noticed in a recent resolution that Pakistan tried to bring up against India. In May 2020, Pakistan brought up a resolution blaming the Indian government for promoting Islamophobia in the country. This resolution was defeated with the support of friendly countries such as Maldives, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. These three countries, which have very cordial ties with India, they supported India and they defeated Pakistan's resolution. They are even supportive of India's entry into this grouping. This is the reason why India was able to take part as a participant in the recent OIC summit which was held. Last year, a foreign ministers meet of OIC was held and India was invited as a guest. This was possible because of India's close ties with Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Their approach towards India-Pakistan is changing. But Pakistan has found new allies in the form of Turkey and Malaysia, which have taken a stand against India. Right? Malaysia, Turkey were at the forefront of criticizing India's decisions on Article 370 and Citizenship Amendment Act. So this is a platform, this is an international grouping where a very interesting game of geopolitics is being played out between Pakistan, India and their respective friends and allies. Initially, India was struggling to bring up its argument at the OIC. Right now, India has found some friends in the form of Saudi Arabia and UAE. It is trying to gain an entry into this grouping because India has a legitimate claim to be a member of the OIC because India has one of the world's largest Muslim populations. Until now, Pakistan has been very dominant. It has used its ties with various countries to target India and internationalize the Kashmir conflict. So that's the reason why the grouping is very, very important. Okay. Now, let's quickly talk about the Genocide Convention as well. Let's take up a question in this regard. Which organization is entitled to mandate the ICC or the International Criminal Court to investigate an alleged breach of the Genocide Convention by a country? Is it the UN General Assembly or the UN Security Council or the International Court of Justice or the UN Human Rights Council? The correct answer is option B. It is the UN Security Council which has been given the right to refer a case of alleged genocide to be investigated by the International Criminal Court. Is that clear? So in this context, we can talk about the Genocide Convention, which was adopted by the United Nations in 1948. It was adopted by the UN General Assembly. This is where you need to understand what is genocide. A genocide is nothing but targeted violence against a particular race or a religion. When a particular set of people or a group of people are being targeted for their race, for their ethnicity, for their religion, right? And when this has state support, it is usually referred to as a genocide. For example, what happened in Rwanda a few years ago? What happened in East Pakistan prior to the 1971 war? Right? Back then, the Pakistani army, the West Pakistani army, had carried out a genocide against the Bengali minorities. Similarly, the manner in which the Rohingya minority have been targeted by the Myanmar army with the discreet support of the Myanmar government. So, when there is indirect support of the state to a targeted violence against a group of people, of a certain religion, of a certain race, then such an act, such a murderous act is referred to as a genocide. Okay? The legal definition of genocide has been provided in the Genocide Convention of 1948, and those countries which have signed on to it, which have acceded to the Genocide Convention, they have an obligation to prevent genocides from happening. They also have an obligation to punish those governments and those officials who are involved in committing acts of genocide. So in this regard, the countries concerned, they can petition the UN Security Council, and the UN Security Council has the powers to recommend the case to be investigated by the International Criminal Court. Is that clear? So please write this down. This point can be very important for prelims. So as of now, 152 countries have ratified or acceded to the Genocide Convention. India is one of them. India signed and acceded to this convention way back in the 1950s itself. Okay? Then please remember, Mauritius was one of the latest entrants to sign and accede to the Genocide Convention. This happened last year, so this can also be a possible prelims question. UPSC might ask, which country recently joined or acceded to the Genocide Convention? The correct answer would be Mauritius. Now, moving on to the next question, that is the 24th question. The term avant-garde, recently seen in news, refers to an arms reduction treaty signed between US and Russia, a hypersonic glide vehicle recently tested and made operational by Russia, the proposed peace treaty to resolve the civil war in Ukraine, a road and rail connectivity project in Eurasia led by China. The correct answer is option B. Avant-garde refers to a hypersonic glide vehicle that was recently tested and made operational by Russia. So in this context, let's quickly talk about hypersonic vehicles and hypersonic missiles. This topic is acquiring a lot of significance, mainly because there are 4 countries which have entered into an arms race with regard to the development of hypersonic glide vehicles and hypersonic missiles. These 4 countries include Russia, United States, China, and recently India. Just a few days ago, I think 4 to 5 days back, the DRDO has tested a hypersonic vehicle, right? Hypersonic technology has been demonstrated by India as well. But Russia, US, and China are far ahead. So this is essentially an ongoing arms race. So it's very important to understand the basics of hypersonic flight. You need to understand what unique advantages do hypersonic vehicles provide. But first and foremost, let us define what is hypersonic travel or hypersonic flight. See, when an object travels at a speed greater than 5 times the speed of sound, it is usually referred to as hypersonic. Right? When an object flies at a speed of greater than Mach 5, that is 5 times greater than the speed of sound, then it is said that the object is traveling at hypersonic speed. Is that clear? So when a vehicle or when a missile or when a delivery vehicle, when it is traveling at a speed greater than Mach 5, it is said to achieve hypersonic speeds. This speed is very, very useful in delivering weapons, in delivering warheads. See, a hypersonic vehicle which can travel at this speed can deploy both conventional warheads and as well as nuclear warheads or a nuclear payload. The advantage of a hypersonic vehicle or a hypersonic missile is that it combines the advantages of both cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. See, the advantage of a cruise missile is that it usually flies at a very low altitude. It literally hugs to the surface of the ground, and as a result, it is able to evade radar detection. Cruise missiles travel at considerable speed. They fly very low to the ground, very close to the ground. They fly at a very low altitude and they evade any detection by the radars. So they are able to avoid any interception by the other side, right? They can't be easily intercepted. Then moreover, cruise missiles are highly maneuverable. You can easily maneuver them to lock onto a target and strike the target with great precision. So this is an advantage of cruise missiles. But cruise missiles do not travel at great speeds. They do not have phenomenal speeds. Then you have ballistic missiles, which do register very great speeds. But the problem is your regular ballistic missiles can't be maneuvered so easily. This is where hypersonic technology comes in. Hypersonic vehicles, especially hypersonic glide vehicles, they not only travel at 5 times the speed of sound or even greater than that, but they can also be maneuvered. They can be easily moved around and they can be made to strike a target with great precision. It basically combines the advantages of both a cruise missile and a ballistic missile. So as a result, hypersonic missiles can easily evade interception by any ballistic missile defense shield that the other country has put up. So this is the advantage of hypersonic missiles. So there is an arms race going on to develop this technology, and Russia has taken a leap ahead of the other countries. Russia recently tested a hypersonic glide vehicle known as Avangard. It has even operationalized it. Reportedly, it has even deployed this hypersonic glide vehicle, which can deliver conventional and maybe even nuclear payloads. United States and China, even they are not far behind. The US is also developing the same technology. It has already tested this technology as well. I think in March 2020, the United States carried out a test of hypersonic flight, and it is in the process of further developing the technology and producing hypersonic missiles based on this technology. Then China has tested its hypersonic missile named as DF-ZF. It is based on the DF-17 ballistic missiles of China. China has a medium-range ballistic missile known as the DF-17. By using this, it has developed a hypersonic missile known as DF-ZF, and China has also demonstrated its hypersonic capabilities. So India recently joined the same club, the elite club. Just a few days ago, the DRDO has successfully tested a hypersonic technology demonstrator vehicle. But still, India is way far behind the other 3 countries. The other 3 countries have already made tremendous progress towards deploying their hypersonic technology. But India is at least 5 years away from developing hypersonic missiles. Because right now what we tested was just a technology demonstrator vehicle. In the future, India would be looking to develop hypersonic missiles for military purposes, for strategic purposes. But also remember that hypersonic technology is a dual-use technology. This can be a possible prelims question. Hypersonic technology is a dual-use technology, meaning it has both military and civilian applications. The military application is that hypersonic flight and hypersonic vehicles can be used for delivering missiles and warheads. The civilian application is that it can be used to launch satellites, especially small nano satellites, into low Earth orbits. Okay, so kindly remember this. Moving on to the next question. Which 2 rivers are at the source of the border dispute between India and Nepal? I'm sure most of you would have read about the latest border tensions between India and Nepal, right? See, India and Nepal have a standing border dispute at 2 locations known as Kala Pani and Susta. Both the disputes are primarily attributed to the course and the flow of 2 rivers, and that is the Kali River and the Gandak River. So option A is the right answer. Let's understand the dispute in more detail. See, first we'll talk about the Kala Pani border dispute. See, both the Kala Pani and the Susta border dispute, they trace back their origin to the Treaty of Sugauli, which was signed way back in 1816 between the British government and the Kingdom of Nepal. After the Anglo-Nepalese War came to an end, right? The Treaty of Sugauli was signed in 1816 in order to mark out the boundaries of the Kingdom of Nepal. So while marking these boundaries, the then surveyors of the British government, they made use of the Kali River as a reference to identify the westernmost boundary of Nepal. The Kali River takes birth in the Himalayas. It flows through Nepal and as well as through the Indian state of Uttarakhand. The Kali River is also known as the Sharda River, the Mahakali River. These are the different names for it. So the Kali River was used as a reference while marking out the boundary between British India and the Kingdom of Nepal. What happened was, as per the Treaty of Sugauli, one of the tributaries of the Kali River was taken as a reference to draw the boundary between the 2 regions, that is between British India and the Kingdom of Nepal. But the problem is that the Kali River in this region, that is near Kala Pani, has multiple tributaries. There are many tributaries near the Kala Pani region, And as a result, there is a confusion with regard to which tributary was chosen as the boundary between India and Nepal. Nepal argues that the easternmost tributary of the Kali River was recognized by the Treaty of Sugauli, and hence it claims the entire Kalapani region to itself. India's claim is that the Treaty of Sugauli had recognized the westernmost tributary of the Kali River, and thereby Kalapani belongs to India. So this was a minor border dispute after independence. It was not a major dispute. Initially, India-Nepal had very good relations, very friendly relations. But unfortunately, this minor border dispute was never addressed. Even though joint working groups had been set up, even though recommendations had come up from the joint working group, they were never implemented, and as a result, it became a festering dispute. And in the last 1 year, especially in the last 8 to 10 months, the border dispute has flared up. It has become a major point of contention between India and Nepal. Why? Because India took a few controversial steps in the last 1 year. Even Nepal has taken a few controversial steps in the last 1 year. See, what happened was on the 5th of August 2019, India brought down Article 370, right? India took away the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. And immediately the state of J&K was reorganized and it was divided into 2 union territories. So to take this new geographical changes into account, India published the official political map of India. A new political map was brought out by the government of India. In this new political map, India unilaterally claimed the entire Kalapani region. So this triggered anger in Nepal. Nepal felt that India was unilaterally claiming Nepal to itself by publishing these new political maps. Is that clear? So when India published these new maps, Nepal, its government and its parliament had raised an issue and it had criticized India. Then recently, just a couple of months ago, in the month of June, India inaugurated a new road that passes through the Kalapani region. This road has been built by the Border Roads Organization. This road connects Darchula with the strategic Lipu Lake Pass. The Lipu Lake Pass is located at the tri-junction of India, China and Nepal. Okay? And it is also one of the routes for the Kailash Manas Sarovar Yatra. It is one of the routes to reach Mount Kailash in Tibet. Right? So Kailash Manas Sarovar Yatra has 2 popular routes. One is through the Nathula Pass in Sikkim. The other one is through the Lipu Lake Pass in Uttarakhand. So India constructed a road and inaugurated the road that connects Darchula with Lipu Lake Pass in order to make the pilgrimage easier. It was supposed to make it easier for the pilgrims traveling to Mount Kailash as a part of the Kailash Manas Sarovar Yatra. So when India inaugurated this road, Nepal raised an objection. Why? Because the road passes through the Kalapani region and Nepal said the entire Kalapani region belongs to Nepal's territory. It openly challenged the provisions of the Treaty of Sugauli again, and it raised a fresh diplomatic dispute, and it has aggravated the border dispute over the last few weeks. So it has become a major source of tension in the India-Nepal relationship. India believes that the role of China is critical to this border dispute. India has even stated that KP Oli, the current Prime Minister of Nepal, is seemingly pro-China, and probably at the insistence of China, Nepal is taking such a hostile stand against India. Right? So such controversial statements have been made by Indian leaders as well. So as you can see, the border dispute between India and Nepal has become quite complicated. At one point, it was a minor dispute which had been ignored for years together. But since the issue was not addressed, right now, it has become a major source of tension in the India-Nepal relationship. The other dispute is the Susta dispute. It is located near Nepal's borders with the state of Bihar. Okay? This dispute can also be traced back to the Treaty of Sugauli. It can also be traced back to the Treaty of Sugauli of 1816. So while drawing up these boundaries in 1816, the British had used one river as a reference to draw the boundaries. This was the Gandak River, which is also known as Sapta Gandaki or the Narayani River. These are the different names for it. The Gandak River flows down from Nepal, enters the West Champaran district of Bihar in India. Right? The Treaty of Sugauli had said that the right bank of the Gandak River will be recognized as Nepal's territory and the left bank of the Gandak River will be recognized as Indian territory. This was the provision of the Treaty of Sugauli. But what has happened is, over the last 200 years, the course of the Gandak River or the Narayani River has changed. As a result, the left and the right banks have got mixed up. So this is a source of dispute. India has a different claim, Nepal has a different claim, and as a result, the Susta border dispute is also pending. Until recently, it was a minor dispute, but of late, it has become a major dispute because the issue has been flared up by the Nepali government. Nepal's parliament even passed an amendment. It brought out a new political map as well, claiming the entire Kalapani and Susta region to itself. As of now, the issue remains unresolved, but it is a major source of tension as of now in the India-Nepal relationship. Now let's move on to the next question. India has signed the Migration and Mobility Partnership Agreement with which country? Is it with United States, France, Japan, or Germany? The correct answer is option B. India has signed the Mobility and Migration Partnership Agreement with France. Okay? Let's understand what is this agreement, why was it signed, and why is it important. See, this agreement was recently signed by India and France, and in Jan 2020, the Indian cabinet, the Union cabinet, has approved India's ratification of the Migration and Mobility Partnership Agreement. This agreement has been signed between India and France mainly to facilitate people-to-people relations. As the name itself indicates, it promotes easier migration and mobility of people from one country to another. Basically, Indian professionals, Indian students, they can easily travel to France to study and work and reside over there. It's a mutually beneficial agreement. It applies for both Indians and French nationals. The objective is to promote people-to-people contacts, help students and professionals and academics and even researchers and skilled professionals to travel freely between the two countries so that they can contribute to the research and development ecosystem of both the countries. With this objective in mind, the agreement has been signed, and it also helps both the countries to deal with illegal migration and human trafficking. These are the three important provisions of this agreement. Kindly remember them. One, it is designed to promote people-to-people contacts between India and France. It will help Indian professionals, Indian students, Indian researchers to easily travel to France and study there and work there. It is reciprocal. Even French citizens can do the same in India. Okay? And third, it will help tackle the problem of illegal migration and human trafficking. So this agreement has been ratified by the Indian cabinet, and this is expected to further promote people-to-people relations between India and France. So this agreement basically reflects the close relationship that India and France have. It actually reflects the trust and the confidence that both the countries have in their relationship. Moving on to the next question. The proposed China-Myanmar Economic Corridor connects with which port of Myanmar? The correct answer is option C. It connects with the Kyaukphyu port of Myanmar. Please look at this map. The China-Myanmar Economic Corridor project is an ambitious connectivity project that China has proposed, and it is an integral part of its Belt and Road Initiative, or also known as the One Belt, One Road project. It is quite similar to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor project. China's objective is to connect its Yunnan province with strategic ports of Myanmar that open towards the Bay of Bengal. Is that clear? The key component of the project is to connect the Yunnan province of China with road and rail networks to the port of Kyaukphyu, located in the Rakhine state. And please note, the Kyaukphyu port that China is developing is located just a few kilometers to the south of the Sitwe port that India has developed as a part of the Kaladan project. Just a few kilometers to the north of Kyaukphyu, you will find the Sitwe port that we saw yesterday. India has developed the Sitwe port as a part of its Kaladan project. So just to the south of Sitwe port, you have the Kyokhfu port that China is developing, and it is a part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. It is an integral component of the China-Myanmar economic corridor. Then China is also investing in the development of the Tilawa port over here. Even Japan is involved in funding a part of this project. Okay. Then you can see Dawai over here. At Dawai, there is a port and a special economic zone that is coming up. And reportedly, Japan is looking to fund this project. Okay. So all these 4 ports of Myanmar are very important. The Sitwe port developed by India, Kyokhfu port and SEZ being developed by China, Tilawa port and SEZ being developed by China with some support of Japan, Dawai port and SEZ being developed with Japan's assistance, right? So these projects, these commercial projects of China, they do have a strategic angle to it. Why? Because it encircles India, as we discussed yesterday, right? It could be considered as a part of China's string of pearls strategy against India. The objective could be to contain Indian influence in the Bay of Bengal and in the Indian Ocean region. India's concerns become even more aggravated because in the Bay of Bengal, near the Andaman and Nicobar Islands of India, Myanmar has a small island known as the Coco Island. Just a little north to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Myanmar has a small island in the Bay of Bengal known as the Coco Island. Reportedly, Myanmar has leased the Coco Island to China. Why? For a strategic purpose. India believes that China is using Coco Island to carry out espionage and surveillance against India. Because the Coco Island occupies a strategic location. It will help China monitor India's military activities in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. If you are aware, this is the only place where India has a tri-services command that is operational. All the 3 armed forces, they are functioning under a single command, under the Andaman Nicobar command, and it runs critical operations across Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean, especially with regard to naval activities and military activities near the Strait of Malacca. Plus, from Coco Island, it would be easier for China to monitor India's missile testing activities. Because off the coast of Odisha, we have the APJ Abdul Kalam Island that is located near Chandipur and Balsore. This is where the DRDO has a missile testing facility. This is where India's strategic missiles, the Agni series and the others, are tested. Then down south in Visakhapatnam, the Indian Navy has a major naval base. This is where India's nuclear submarines are being built. That is the Arihant class submarines. They are being built in Visakhapatnam. So across the eastern seaboard of India, there are a number of strategic facilities and establishments of India. So China probably wants to monitor these activities of India. So it is believed that Myanmar has leased the Coco Island to China a few decades ago. And over the years, China has reportedly built surveillance infrastructure over here to primarily carry out espionage and spying against Indian military targets. So this is one reason why India is concerned about China's increasing economic involvement in Myanmar. Okay, China's primary interest is to exploit the hydrocarbon reserves of Myanmar present in the Bay of Bengal. It has already built oil pipelines that transport hydrocarbons from the Rakhine state, from the Kyokhfu port to the Yunnan province. So China has already made tremendous advancement with regard to its economic investments in Myanmar. So please be aware of these important locations. It can be a prelims map-based question. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Prime Minister's office has announced the setting up of a new division on New and Emerging Strategic Technologies, or NEST. It is expected to act as the nodal division to deal with security implications arising due to emergence of new technologies like 5G and artificial intelligence. Its mandate shall include, but not be limited to, evolving India's external technology policy in coordination with domestic stakeholders. It will also help assess foreign policy and international legal implications of new and emerging technologies and recommend appropriate foreign policy choices. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect because this new division known as NEST has not been set up by the PMO. It has not been set up within the PMO. It has been set up within the Ministry of External Affairs. The MEA has recently set up a new division. It has opened a new division within the ministry known as NEST. It stands for New and Emerging Strategic Technologies. So the first statement is incorrect. Option C would be the right answer. So let us talk about this new division in more detail. See, today the global economy is being driven by the fourth industrial revolution, right? The global economy of today is being driven by the fourth industrial revolution. And this fourth stage of the industrial revolution is being driven by new emerging strategic technologies. This includes artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, Internet of Things, robotics, 5G, etc. These new emerging technologies, they have tremendous strategic potential. They are driving the future of growth. And these new technologies also bring up numerous security challenges as well. Why? Because few countries are dominant in these technologies. For example, United States and Western countries, they have great dominance in areas such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics. China is very dominant in these emerging technologies, especially with regard to the rollout of 5G networks. This is where the role of Huawei networks comes into question. I'm sure most of you would have heard about this Chinese telecom mobile company known as Huawei. Its role has in the global telecom market has become very controversial. It is said that Chinese company Huawei and even ZTE both have very close links with China's security agencies, right? It is believed that these companies are installing backdoors so that China can carry out cyber espionage and cyber attacks against the targets of other countries. These companies are in a position to do that because they have a dominant position in their respective markets. You look at the global telecom and internet infrastructure. The back-end infrastructure is largely provided by companies like Huawei. They have a monopoly over there. Be it India, be it US, or be it Europe. The telecom internet infrastructure is heavily dependent on the equipment that is built by Huawei. So the suspicion of security agencies in India and the West is that these Chinese built telecom and internet equipment might come with pre-installed backdoors through which Chinese security agencies can hack into the networks, carry out espionage, steal information, and even carry out cyber attacks. So for this reason, emerging technologies are posing an economic challenge, they are posing a geopolitical challenge, and they are posing a security challenge as well. So to evolve a fine-tuned policy, a foreign policy towards NEST technologies, India has set up a new division within the MEA. Is that clear? This division has not come up within the Ministry of Science and Tech, not within the Ministry of Telecom, but it has been set up under MEA because there is a clear geopolitical angle to these technologies. Countries which dominate these technologies will rule the future. There are direct security and economic implications because of this. So to understand these emerging dynamics because of NEST technologies, MEA has created a new division. It will monitor the global developments. It will help the Indian government evolve a policy towards the new technologies. It will help assess the international legal ramifications. It will recommend foreign policy choices to the MEA and the government of India. So India is trying to catch up and understand this evolving domain, which is transforming technology, economy, and as well as geopolitics. So for this reason, the NEST division has been set up. Then moving on, the Quds force, recently seen in news, is a special force belonging to which country? The correct answer is option A, Iran. The Quds force was in news because a top Iranian military commander known as Qasem Soleimani was recently assassinated by the United States. At the beginning of this year, in January, a top military commander of Iran was assassinated by the US through a drone strike. This came at a period when tensions between US-Iran were extremely high. See, I hope you know that the Trump government has quit the Iran nuclear deal, also known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. After quitting the nuclear deal, Trump administration reimposed economic sanctions against Iran. As a result, the Iranian economy was being crippled. Iran was struggling to sustain its economy. So Iran was looking to retaliate against the US, and tensions had already started to increase in the Persian Gulf, that is near the Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz is critical for global oil shipments. It is a choke point through which most of the global oil shipments pass through. So Iran was already carrying out a few covert operations in the region in order to counter American sanctions, and it was trying to target American allies in the region, such as Saudi Arabia, Israel, etc. So at this juncture, the United States escalated the conflict. It was essentially a covert war that was going on between US and Iran, and it chose to escalate the conflict by labeling the IRGC, which is the elite armed force of Iran, as a terrorist outfit. Basically, the US government labeled the armed force of a sovereign country as a terror group. The IRGC is an elite armed force of Iran, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And IRGC is known to conduct covert operations in the region in order to push Iran's geopolitical agenda. And within the IRGC, there is a special unit known as the Quds Force. The Quds Force operates within the IRGC. It is basically a special force that specializes in covert operations, collection of military intelligence, and it is known to wage an unconventional war in the region. It is known to target American allies such as Saudi Arabia and Israel. It is known to target American interests. How does it do it? By supporting proxy elements such as the Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas, and other Palestinian outfits in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Yesterday we discussed the Houthi rebels and how they have been supported by Iran to trigger a civil war in Yemen. Similarly, a number of Shia militant groups have been supported by the Quds Force, and they are operating in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So Iran has great influence in this region. It tries to engage in such proxy wars, and the Quds Force was critical to run these operations. It was a special force belonging to the IRGC. And the commander of the Quds Force, who was a senior military commander of the IRGC, was assassinated by the United States after labeling the IRGC as a terror group. So this open attack by the US against a sovereign entity, against a state actor of Iran, it significantly escalated the tensions. There was every possibility of a larger conflict or a war breaking out in January. Tensions were very high, and this pushed Iran to retaliate as well. Iran launched missiles against American military bases in Iraq as a retaliation. And during this strike, Iran accidentally brought down a commercial aircraft as well. A commercial aircraft was accidentally brought down. So when tensions were running so high, Donald Trump, he posted a very irresponsible tweet. Donald Trump tweeted that if Iran escalates the tensions, then US will not hesitate to retaliate against Iran. And he said that US would even target the cultural centers in Iran. The cultural heritage centers of Iran would be targeted. This statement was publicly made by Donald Trump. So this brings us to the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict is also referred to as the Hague Convention. It is the first international treaty focused exclusively on the protection of cultural heritage during war and armed conflict. The Rome Statute of 1998 treats any international attack, any intentional attack against a historical monument or a building dedicated to religion, education, art, or science as a war crime. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. See, we have the Hague Convention, which happens to be the first convention, first international treaty to focus exclusively on the protection of cultural heritage centers during times of war and conflict. When was this convention signed? It was signed way back in 1954. Please note down these facts. Okay? The Hague Convention to protect cultural property in the event of war and conflict was signed in 1954. After the Hague Convention, we have the Rome Statute of 1998, which provides for the establishment of the International Criminal Court. Even this statute, the Rome Statute, treats any attack, any intentional attack against a cultural heritage center as a war crime. So this is the second international treaty that tries to protect cultural centers during times of war and conflict. So the threat issued by Donald Trump brought up both the topics into news. So when Trump issued this threat against Iranian cultural sites, the Hague Convention was frequently quoted, because if US were to attack a cultural site, right, a site of cultural significance and importance, then it would be violating the Hague Convention. Then US would also risk being accused of war crimes under the Rome Statute of 1998, which has provided for the establishment of the International Criminal Court. So that's the reason why these two topics were in news, and hence I want you to focus on this, because this could be a possible prelims question. Okay, there are 133 signatories to the Hague Convention. US, Iran and India have signed and ratified the Hague Convention. But remember, India has not signed and ratified the Rome Statute. India is not a signatory to the Rome Statute. Why? Because India feels that the Rome Statute provides tremendous powers to the UN Security Council to push for investigation of war crimes at the International Criminal Court. India fears that this provision could be misused for geopolitical reasons. Because see, India itself has numerous internal conflicts. We have Northeast insurgency in Kashmir, the Maoist conflict. So it's quite easy for a hostile country to accuse Indian forces of committing war crimes and human rights violations and bring up a case at the International Criminal Court by making the P5 members of the Security Council refer a case of investigation to the ICC. Earlier we saw a question where we understood that the UNSC has the powers to mandate an investigation on allegations of genocide and war crimes, and ICC can take up such investigation. So India feels that this provision is discriminatory under the Rome Statute. India feels that it could be misused for geopolitical reasons. It could be used by our rival countries, hostile countries, to target India. So for this reason, India has not signed or nor ratified the Rome Statute. So please be aware of all these facts. Now moving on to the 31st question. India is looking to procure the MH-60 Romeo helicopters from which country? The correct answer is the United States. Option B is the right answer. See, this agreement was recently signed when US President Donald Trump paid a visit to India. In February 2020, when Trump traveled to India, an agreement was signed to procure the MH-60 Romeo helicopters. In this context, please note down the important defense military equipment that India has procured from the United States. This could also be a potential prelims question. India has procured the C-130J Super Hercules military transport aircraft. It is mainly used for airlifting special forces and dropping them behind enemy lines. It is largely used for tactical operations. It is also used in HADR operations during disasters to provide aid and relief. C-17 Globemaster is another military transport aircraft. It is a heavy lift aircraft. It helps India transport heavy equipment, including troops, then armored vehicles, artillery guns, battle tanks, and even small helicopters can be transported within the C-17 Globemaster. Then P-8 Poseidon, manufactured by Boeing, has been procured for the Indian Navy. See, C-130J and C-17 are for the Indian Air Force. P-8 Poseidon has been procured for the Indian Navy. This aircraft is critical for maritime surveillance and mainly for anti-submarine warfare. P-8 Poseidon is crucial for the Indian Navy to monitor the submarine activity of China across the Indian Ocean region. This is the reason why the United States has sold such a critical defense platform to India. P-8 Poseidon has special capabilities to track down submarines which actually have stealth features and launch attacks against them. It specializes in anti-submarine warfare. Next, we have recently inducted the Apache and Chinook helicopters. Apache is an attack helicopter. Okay. Then Chinook is mainly used for military transport, transporting equipment and soldiers. Then we have also procured the M777 howitzer artillery guns from the US. Plus, we are procuring the 6-hour 716 assault rifles for the Indian Armed Forces. These are some of the important defense equipment that India is procuring from the United States. This is what makes US the second largest defense supplier to India? The first largest is Russia, second largest supplier is the United States, and the third largest is Israel. So please remember these facts as well. So we have one more question left, the 32nd question. I think we can take up this tomorrow because we are already reaching the end of today's session. So we are left with just one question, just one topic related to FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. So let's push this topic for tomorrow. We'll have some more topics that we'll be covering. We'll focus on topics that were in news between April and September. I hope the session has been useful. This concludes our discussion for the day. So thanks for watching. Thanks for staying with us. Good night.